February 14, 1945. 06 for 7 hours. Or Roer River Valley, Germany. Fog clings to the shattered tree line like a funeral shroud. The air tastes of cordite and wet earth. Across the frozen mud, a column of American M4 Sherman tanks grinds forward, engines growling in the pre-dawn gloom. Inside the lead tank, Staff Sergeant Robert Henley squints through his periscope, scanning the ghostly silhouette of a farmhouse 300 yards ahead. His hands are steady on the traverse wheel. His breath fogs in the cramped turret. The radio crackles with static. Then a voice cuts through clear, crisp, immediate. Baker 2-1. Disable 6. Enemy armor. You're 11 o'clock. Range 400. Move now. Henley doesn't hesitate. The Sherman pivots left with the precision of a surgical instrument. 15 seconds later, a Panther tank emerges from the mist, exactly where the voice said it would be. The 75mm barks once. The Panther's track explodes in a spray of steel and smoke. The German crew bails out, stumbling through the fog, faces twisted in disbelief. They had not fired a single shot. U.S. 1st Army After-Action Report, February 1945. 400 miles south. At the same hour, another kind of battle unfolds. Over the rail yards of Nuremberg, a formation of B-17 Flying Fortresses drones through thick cloud cover at 22,000 feet. Flak bursts pepper the sky, black blooms of shrapnel and fury. Inside the lead bomber, Bombardier Lieutenant Jack Morris watches his Norden bomb sight with the intensity of a jeweler inspecting a diamond. But it is not the bomb sight that matters most today. It is the small black box bolted beneath the navigator's tabler device, the size of a briefcase, humming with electrical life. The box listens, it translates, it calculates, and when the formation breaks through the clouds, the bombs fall not in a scattered pattern of hope, but in a tightening spiral of devastation. The rail yard ceases to exist in under 90 seconds. German ground crews, watching from a kilometer away, cannot comprehend what they are seeing. The precision is inhuman. U.S. Strategic Bombing Survey, 1946. This is not sorcery. It is not luck. It is technology, American technology operating at a level the enemy did not anticipate, did not prepare for, and, in many cases, did not believe was possible. By the winter of 1945, the Third Reich and the Empire of Japan had been fighting the United States for more than 3 years. They had studied American doctrine, dissected captured equipment, and interrogated prisoners. They knew about the Sherman thin armor and the B-17's vulnerability to fighter attack. They knew about American industrial capacity, the flood of steel and gasoline pouring across 2 oceans. What they did not know, what they could not see until it was far too late, was that beneath the surface of that industrial tide, a revolution in coordination, communication, and applied engineering had quietly reshaped the nature of modern war. The year 1942 had been a crucible. American forces were green, under-equipped, and often outmatched in tactical skill. At Kasserine Pass in February 1943, German panzers had shredded American armor formations with contemptuous ease. The U.S. the Second Corps lost over 6,000 men, 198 tanks, and 57 half-tracks. In a matter of days, U.S. Army Center of Military History. Official History, 1993. Erwin Rommel's after-action assessment was brutal. The Americans were brave but clumsy, their tanks inferior, their coordination abysmal. In the Pacific, Japanese Zeros danced circles around early model Wildcats. The Imperial Navy's long-lance torpedoes, oxygen-fueled Reckless, with a range of 11 miles, turned night battles into slaughterhouses for American destroyers. Bureau of Ships War Damage Report, No. 38, 1943. The strategic calculus seemed grim. American doctrine relied on overwhelming material superiority and the courage of citizen soldiers. It was the Soviet model without the Soviet ruthlessness, the British model without the British experience. Quantity over quality, attrition over finesse. But something was changing. In factories across the American heartland, Chicago, Newark, Los Angeles, a different kind of weapon was being born. Not a bigger gun, not thicker armor, something subtler, something the enemy would not recognize until it had already won the war. Engineers at Motorola were perfecting frequency-modulated radio sets that could cut through static and jamming with crystalline clarity, allowing tank platoons to coordinate maneuvers in real time. Technical Manual TM11-242, 1944. At the Naval Research Laboratory, scientists were shrinking radar components into portable units small enough to fit in the nose of a torpedo bomber, giving pilots the ability to find enemy ships in total darkness or through monsoon squalls. NRA Report R2389, 1944. At the Carrier Engineering Corporation in Syracuse, technicians were designing refrigeration units that could keep blood, plasma and penicillin viable aboard Liberty ships crossing the equator, turning logistics into life. Itself War Production Board Report, 1945. These were not the technologies that made headlines. They were not the atomic bomb or the P-51 Mustang. They were incremental, invisible, and absolutely lethal. The Germans noticed first. In Normandy, panzer commanders reported something impossible: American armored columns moving with the fluidity of a single organism, responding to threats before those threats had even developed. They fight like they can see through walls. One captured officer told interrogators in August 1944, Shafe G2 Intelligence Summary Number 47. August 1944, dramatized composite. In the Pacific, Japanese destroyer captains began filing reports of American aircraft appearing out of nowhere, attacking with surgical precision despite zero visibility. The enemy possesses a form of vision we do not understand, read one intercepted transmission from the Battle of Leyte Gulf Sinkpak War Diary, October 1944. They were right. The Americans could see through walls. They could hear through storms. They could strike with a coordination that seemed psychic but was, in fact, entirely mechanical. By the time Sergeant Henley Sherman reached the Roer River that February morning, the technological gap had become a chasm. The war was no longer a contest of courage or even firepower. It had become a test of systems, communication systems, targeting systems, logistical systems, and, in that test, the United States had quietly, methodically, pulled ahead. The enemy was still fighting the War of 1942. America was fighting the War of 1955. But what, exactly, had changed? What were these invisible weapons, and how had they turned the tide when the tanks were still too light and the soldiers still too young? The answer lies not in a single invention, but in a belief that information, coordination, and speed could defeat raw power. It lies in the hands of engineers whose names never appeared in newspapers, and in the minds of commanders who understood that modern war was no longer won by the strongest but by the fastest to adapt. The fog over the Roer was lifting, and with it, the illusion that technology alone meant tonnage and caliber. The real war, the one the enemy never saw coming, was about to be revealed. The secret was not a single weapon. It was a web-an invisible lattice of electrical signals, synchronized timing, and ruthlessly efficient logistics that turned isolated units into a single breathing organism. At its heart was a piece of technology so mundane, so unglamorous, that historians would overlook it for decades: the -300 Seychelles rupees backpack radio and its vehicular cousin, the SCR-508, developed by the Signal Corps Engineering Laboratories at Fort Monmouth, New Jersey, and mass-produced by Motorola and Galvin Manufacturing. These frequency-modulated radios operated in the 40 to 48 MHz band with a clarity that stunned everyone who used them. Technical Manual TM11-242, 1944. Unlike the amplitude-modulated sets, the Germans relied on prone-to-static interference and eavesdropping. The FM radios delivered voices as clear as a telephone call, even through artillery barrages and electronic jamming. Range: 3 miles for infantry, 20 miles for tanks. Weight: 38 pounds for the -300 Seychelles rupees, compact enough for a single soldier to carry into combat. By June 1944, over 50,000 -300 Seychelles rupees units had been fielded in the European theatre alone. Signal Corps Technical Report, SCL-4401, 1945. The impact was immediate and devastating. In the hedgerows of Normandy, where German MG-42 machine gun nests turned every field into a killing zone, American infantry squads could now call for tank support, artillery fire, and airstrikes within seconds. Company commanders could coordinate flanking maneuvers across multiple platoons in real time, adjusting to enemy movements faster than the Germans could react. A Wehrmacht after-action report from July 1944 noted with frustration, "The American infantry does not fight. It coordinates. By the time our machine gunners acquire a target, mortar fire has already bracketed the position captured. German document, ETHINT 58, 1945, dramatized composite. The radio was not just a communication device, it was a force multiplier. It collapsed the decision-making cycle from minutes to seconds, turning green American troops into something that resembled a hive mind. But communication meant nothing without coordination, and coordination meant nothing without knowledge of where the enemy actually was. This is where the second invisible weapon emerged, portable radar. The SCR-584 gun-laying radar, designed by the MIT Radiation Laboratory and manufactured by Western Electric, could track aircraft with pinpoint accuracy out to 30 miles, feeding targeting data directly to anti-aircraft batteries. Radiation Lab Report RL6402, 1944. It was a cube of vacuum tubes and cathode ray screens mounted on a trailer, operated by a crew of 5, and it revolutionized air defense. At Antwerp in late 1944, German V-1 buzz bombs Hitler's terror weapon, a jet-propelled cruise missile with a 1-ton warhead, drained down on Allied supply lines at a rate of 50 per day. The SCR-584 changed everything. Coupled with proximity-fused shells and other American innovation, developed at Johns Hopkins Applied Physics Laboratory, the radar-directed guns achieved a kill rate of 79%. U.S. Army Anti-Aircraft Command Report, January 1945. The V-1 offensive, which had paralyzed London, was neutralized in weeks. German engineers, inspecting the wreckage of their missiles, found no evidence of direct hits. The shells had exploded nearby, shredding the V-1 south with shrapnel. "They are shooting at us with bullets that think," one Luftwaffe officer wrote in his diary. Bundeswehr. Captured correspondence, 1945, dramatized composite. In the Pacific, radar won a different kind of war. The AN, a PS-4 airborne radar, fitted into the nose cones of TBF Avenger torpedo bombers, could detect enemy ships through cloud cover, rainstorms, and the blackest tropical nights. Bureau of Aeronautics, Technical Order 014 on D2, 1944. Each unit weighed 112 pounds, scanned a 60-degree arc, and had a detection range of 15 miles for a destroyer, 30 miles for a battleship. On the night of October 24, 1944, during the Battle of Leyte Gulf, American carrier planes launched into a typhoon to intercept. Vice Admiral Takeo Kurita's sent a force a flotilla of battleships and cruisers, steaming toward the vulnerable American landing beaches. Visibility was zero. Rain hammered the canopies. The pilots flew by instruments alone, but their radar saw what their eyes could not. At 03 for 2 hours, Lieutenant Commander Robert Cosgrove's Avenger locked onto the super battleship Musashi, 68,000 tons of imperial steel, and radioed its position to the Strike Group SINCPAC Action Report, November 1944. Over the next 6 hours, 19 torpedo and 17 bomb hits sent the Musashi to the bottom. Kurita, shaken and disoriented by the relentless precision of attacks he could neither see coming nor escape, turned his fleet around. The invasion was saved. Japanese officers, interrogated after the war, described the American night attacks as supernatural. "We could not hide, we could not run. They always knew where we were." A strategic bombing survey, interrogation Nav No. 1946. Yet none of this would have mattered without the third, least celebrated revolution, logistics. Speed and information are worthless if the fuel runs dry and the ammunition doesn't arrive. This is where American engineering became almost boring in its brilliance. Refrigerated cargo ships, designed by the Maritime Commission and built in Kaiser shipyards, carried blood, plasma, vaccines, and fresh food across the Pacific without spoilage, a feat that reduced disease casualties by 40% compared to the Guadalcanal Campaign. Surgeon General's Report, 1946. Modular pontoon bridges, engineered by the Corps of Engineers, could be assembled in under 4 hours, allowing entire armored divisions to cross rivers the Germans thought were impassable barriers. Corps of Engineers War History, 1945. The Red Ball Express, a convoy system running 24 hours a day from Normandy to the front, delivered 12,000 tons of supplies daily using standardized 5-gallon jets. A design copied from captured German equipment and then improved with a locking mechanism that prevented spills. Quartermaster Corps Historical Study, 1945. Every gallon saved was a mile gained. Every hour shaved off delivery time was a German position overrun before reinforcements arrived. On March 7, 1945, all three invisible weapons converged at the Ludendorff Bridge in Riem. The bridge, one of the last standing across the Rhine, was scheduled for demolition. German engineers had wired it with explosives. American reconnaissance planes, equipped with the K-22 aerial camera and vectored by ground-based SCR-299 radio relays, spotted the bridge intact at 1340 hours and transmitted the intelligence within minutes. 1st Army G to report. March 1945, the 9th Armored Division, communicating via SCR-508 radios, raced 9 miles in under an hour. At 1550 hours, Lieutenant Karl Timmermann led his platoon across the bridge as German detonators failed, sabotaged, some suspected, by forced laborers, but more likely the victim of hastily laid charges and frayed wire. Within 24 hours, 8,000 American troops were across the Rhine. Within 72 hours, a pontoon bridge, erected by the Corps of Engineers, was carrying tanks. The Germans threw everything at Remagen V2 rockets, Luftwaffe bombers, fragment, but the bridgehead held. Coordination, speed, and logistical endurance had achieved what firepower alone never could. The war in Europe had 6 weeks left. The German High Command, dissecting the disaster in hushed conferences, struggled to explain what had happened. Their tanks were still superior in armor and firepower. Their soldiers were still experienced, but they were fighting blind, moving slow, and starving for fuel. The Americans, by contrast, saw everything, moved like lightning, and never ran out of supplies. It was not a fair fight. It had stopped being a fair fight the moment the first -300 Seychelles rupees crackled to life in a Normandy hedgerow. The moment the first radar blip appeared on a cathode screen over the Philippine Sea. The moment the first refrigerated truck delivered plasma to a field hospital in time to save a life that, in any previous war, would have been lost. The invisible weapons had done their work, and the world would never be the same. By the spring of 1945, the psychological impact of American technological coordination had become as lethal as the technology itself. German soldiers no longer fought with the confidence of 1940. They fought with the fatalism of men who knew the sky could see them, the radios could find them, and the artillery would arrive with mathematical certainty. Intercepted Wehrmacht communications from the Ruhr pocket in April reveal a force unraveling, not from lack of courage, but from the erosion of hope. Every movement draws fire within minutes. Every concentration of forces is bombed before we can attack. We are not fighting an army. We are fighting a machine-shaped G2 intelligence summary. No. 341. April 1945. Dramatized composite. Post-war interrogations conducted by the U.S. Strategic Bombing Survey found that German officers consistently rated American coordination and responsiveness as more demoralizing than the sheer volume of firepower. One panzer commander, captured near the Elbe, admitted, "We stopped fearing your tanks. We feared your radios." USSBs. Interview 517, May 1945. The invisible weapons had achieved what propaganda never could. They had convinced the enemy that resistance was not merely futile, but irrational. In the Pacific, the collapse was even more total. Japanese forces, already reeling from losses at sea and in the air, found themselves fighting an enemy that operated at a tempo they could not match. The coordination between American submarines with the TDC Mark III torpedo data computer, a mechanical analog device that calculated firing solutions in seconds, and carrier-based aircraft using airborne radar, created a stranglehold on Japanese shipping that no amount of bravery could break. Submarine Operations Research Group report, 1946. By early 1945, Japan was losing merchant tonnage faster than it could be replaced. Food shipments to the home islands dwindled. Oil from the Dutch East Indies never arrived. Factories starved for raw materials. The Imperial General Staff, reviewing convoy loss reports, understood the nightmare. The Americans had turned the Pacific into a surveillance grid. Every ship, every movement, every attempt to resupply forward garrisons was detected, tracked, and destroyed with industrial efficiency. "The ocean has become transparent to them," wrote one Japanese naval analyst in a report dated February 1945. Captured Japanese document. ATI's translation, No. 4402, 1945. He was correct. Radar, radio, and cryptographic intercepts enabled by the breaking of Japanese naval codes had stripped away the fog of war. What remained was a killing field lit by perfect information. Yet behind this technological dominance stood not machines, but people. The engineers at Fort Monmouth who refined vacuum tube circuits in freezing workshops. The assembly line workers at Motorola who sorted 10,000 radio sets a month under fluorescent lights, their hands raw from repetitive motion. The radar technicians aboard destroyers in the North Atlantic, nursing temperamental equipment through storm spray and electrical surges, recalibrating cathode ray screens at 3 in the morning so that the next convoy would not be ambushed by Atlantic Fleet Maintenance Report, 1944. The refrigeration mechanics who kept blood plasma cold in equatorial heat. The pontoon bridge crews who worked waist-deep in icy rivers under sniper fire. The logistics officers who calculated fuel consumption down to the gallon so that a tank platoon 200 miles from the nearest depot would not run dry in the middle of an advance. Quartermaster Corps Field Manual, FM 1025, 1944. These were not the men who stormed beaches or flew fighter escorts. They were the invisible infantry of modern war technicians, maintainers, problem solvers, and their contribution was as vital as any rifleman's courage. The legacy of these underrated technologies extended far beyond 1945. When the Cold War began, the lessons learned from FM radios and portable radar became the foundation of NATO doctrine. The concept of network-centric warfare, a term that would not be coined until the 1990s, had its roots in the hedgerows of Normandy and the night battles of Leyte Gulf. U.S. Joint Chiefs of Staff, Joint Vision 2020, 1998. The Gulf War of 1991 was won not by superior tanks or aircraft alone, but by superior coordination, ZP's navigation, satellite communication, real-time intelligence, sharing all descendants of the -300 Seychelles rupees and the -584 Seychelles rupees. American forces destroyed the fourth largest army in the world in 100 hours with casualty ratios that would have seemed fantastical in 1943. The Iraqis, like the Germans 50 years before, were not defeated by firepower. They were defeated by invisibility, by an enemy that could see, communicate, and strike faster than human reflexes allowed. Department of Defense. Conduct of the Persian Gulf War. Final Report, 1992. Even in the wars of the 21st century, the principle endures. In Afghanistan and Iraq, American platoons equipped with handheld GPS units, encrypted radios, and drone feeds operated with the situational awareness that insurgents, brave, motivated, and familiar with the terrain, could not counter. The technology had evolved. The philosophy had not. Speed, information, and coordination still outweigh raw combat power. The side that can observe, decide, and act faster wins, regardless of how many soldiers it fields or how much armor it deploys. This was the lesson of 1945, and it remains the lesson today. Yet there is a darker edge to this story. The technologies that gave American forces such an overwhelming advantage also set a precedent. A belief that technological superiority alone could substitute for strategy, that information dominance could replace the need to understand the enemy's motivations or the political complexities of war. Vietnam would challenge that assumption. Iraq would challenge it again. The tools of coordination and precision do not, by themselves, answer the question of whether a war should be fought, or what victory actually means. The invisible weapons of World War II won battles with breathtaking efficiency. They did not, and could not, resolve the deeper questions of human conflict. But in the spring of 1945, as German soldiers stumbled out of foxholes with their hands raised, and Japanese garrisons on forgotten islands realized no supplies would ever come, those questions did not matter. What mattered was that the war was ending, and it was ending because American engineers, workers, and soldiers had mastered the unglamorous art of making things work. Radios that didn't fail, radar that didn't lie, logistics that didn't collapse. They had proven that in modern war, the ability to connect, coordinate, and sustain is more valuable than the ability to destroy. That lesson, learned in blood and steel and the hum of radio static, echoes still. The nation that can see farthest, speak clearest, and move fastest will always hold the advantage. General Dwight D. Eisenhower wrote in his post-war memoir Crusade in Europe, 1948. He was speaking of World War II. He might as well have been speaking of all the wars to come. The invisible weapons had rewritten the rules, and in doing so, They had quietly, irrevocably changed the future.